I'm Tyler Boyd. I'm the Vice President of the McMinn County Historical Society and Archives, which is actually just up College Street over here. We're here at the intersection of White Street and College Street. This is the Tennessee Historical Commission marker commemorating the Battle of Athens, Tennessee, August 1st to 2nd, 1946. It's in a fantastic location because right over here on top of this hill is where the GIs began their assault on the jail during that battle. Later on, we're going to walk down to where the jail was. There's a mural over there you can see. It's sort of a brown color. It's next to Carter Insurance. That parking lot is where the jail once stood. It was torn down in the 1950s. This is right here is where it happened. This was the no man's land between the jail and where the GIs were firing on the hill. And after the battle, they had all sorts of cars overturned. And we have pretty good weather for this too. It's a hot, humid summer day just like it was in August 1946.
I want to give a shout out to Tyler Boyd, who opened the McMinn County Historical Society and Archives located just around the corner from where the battle began. This historical society is a wealth of information about everything that's happened in the county, including the battle, which they're now trying to drum up awareness for. He's also the author of The Biggs Machine, Old Time Politics in Polk County, Tennessee. And another shout out to Travis Davis, the grandson of Bill White, who clarified much of the battle to me. I'll be posting his interviews shortly.
This building is mostly unchanged since the Battle of Athens. This is now owned by Tennessee Wesleyan University. Before that, it was the County Board of Education. Before that, it was the post office. But, of course, this parking lot was not here. But the GI stood right over here. And this home has since been refurbished. But there were still, there were homes there then and there are homes there now. And this wall was here. It might have been a little bit different. I'm not 100% sure about that. But this embankment right here is where they stood, and I do know there were a lot more plants and bushes and trees here because there are photographs of that. And you did not have all this kudzu over here on this wall. They had a better view, but the jail was right there where it says Carter Insurance. It wasn't that far back off the road. It was right there where the parking lot is. And this is where they fired from, and they left the back of the jail open in case the guys wanted to get out with their lives. They weren't going to run off with the ballot boxes. They were ready to get out with their lives. But they had guys on all three sides. They had people, firing over there, firing over there. That way they couldn't escape out the side. And it lasted 6 hours. Got done about, of course, it started around 9:30 when it was dark in August, and then it ended about 3 or 3:30. No one died because the GIs had an elevated position and the deputies in the jail were behind the thick brick wall. There were a lot of injuries, but no one died. And it ended around 3:30 a.m. because some guys from, it's disputed. Some say Meigs County, some say Polk County, which are both very rural counties. If you know them, you'll know. But brought some dynamite in, and they threw 3 dynamite blasts at the porch of the jail. And the third blast blew the porch to smithereens. That's when they came out with the white flag and said, "We're dying in here. We've had enough." They came out and surrendered. And then there were probably about 24 at the most GIs up here firing. Now, there were several witnesses who would come and go and look through the night, women and children, things like that. People remember hearing gunshots living all around. But as far as the amount of GIs that were actually here the whole time firing on the jail, I numbered about, 25 or so, because a lot of that's been exaggerated over the years because people say, I was at the Battle of Athens. It's like, well, maybe you may have been in town that day when they were doing the election and you saw some, voter suppression, to put it mildly. You may have seen that for certain when the sun was up. But, darkness falls. The primary source evidence indicates there were about 24 men up here firing at the jail.
Now I want to talk a little bit about the lead up to the Battle of Athens because a lot of people leave this part out of the story. Basically, the morning of, there was a call put out on the radio which urged GIs and their supporters not to leave after casting their vote, to stick around and see the results of the election. After all, it had been stolen from them before. So after casting their vote, they would usually meet at the Robert Lee Hotel, which of course was right across the street from 116 East Washington Street, the GI Movement headquarters. Now in the GI Movement headquarters, headquarters, you had Jim Buttram, who was the campaign manager, and you had Otto Kennedy, who was the Republican election supervisor. This is before any of the gunshots had even been heard. Bill White was starting to say, why don't you get your guns? And Otto Kennedy said, you know, I'm the official of this county, I'm a career politician, we don't need to go get our guns yet. And because of this, Otto Kennedy said, well, we're probably going to lose this election. Unless we take up arms, I'm going to give you my print shop, entire shop, which is right down this road for once the election is over. After all, Sheriff Mansfield is probably going to kick you out of the headquarters because he's going to claim that you're making a public disturbance. Behind the Presbyterian Church was the office of the Republican Election Commissioner, Otto Kennedy, mentioned a couple times throughout this video as an official supporter of the GI movement. Now, Kennedy was basically advising them in their efforts to watch and make sure that the election was fair. Now, later on, when they captured those 7 deputies, which story I'll get to you later, Otto Kennedy left, feeling that the deputies might legitimately be lynched or slaughtered, and everybody began to congregate around the print shop. This leads me to believe that Kennedy might have had an inkling of an idea that they would congregate there after the fraudulent election as a proving ground to move up to the post office, where they would take positions on the hill overlooking the jail.
We are here at the Waterworks Precinct, which of course now is a probation office. It's on North Jackson Street. This is one of the biggest precincts in McMinn County right here in downtown Athens, and it was known as the Waterworks Precinct. And Tom Gillespie, an elderly farmer who was a black man, probably about 70 years old, came in to vote, and they said, you can't vote here, racial slur, and they pushed him down, but he got back up and tried to vote, and then one of them shot him in the hip. Thankfully he did not die. That really increased tensions, and you had people lined up all over the streets here in town election day. There were hundreds of people on the street.
Regarding historical events, you always have varying views or depictions of what actually happened. But the story is told that my grandfather went to vote right up the street here on North Jackson. And he was met in the precinct by Wendy Wise, who was with the Sheriff's Department. And they told him that he could vote only if he voted the way they directed him to vote. But my grandfather told this person that he had already decided who he was going to vote for. And this enraged this person. Well, they said he punched his father, my grandfather. He had brass knuckles on. And that he threw him outside on the sidewalk. And the story is told that my grandfather got up, put his hat back on, and marched back into the precinct. And that was the last straw for this person that shot me. Now, I asked my aunt, I said, well, what did Papa do? I mean, how did he react to this? You know, it had to be traumatic. And my grandfather was a man of mighty few words. And my aunt said that he rarely talked about the Battle of Athens. The only thing he said is that he forgave this man and he bore no ill will against him. That's the type of human being he was.
And then later on at this precinct, of course, the windows are long gone. This is not an original window. This, of course, has been remodeled. But this building, 2 GIs, poll watchers, had to jump out the window, just jump through the window, really, because they were afraid they were going to be heard. Because the deputies inside who were counting the ballots, of course, they were, committing election fraud. But they said, well, if the poll watchers stay here, then we have cover. Well, it wasn't counted in secret. They were here watching us, so it's fair. and they wanted a way to get out, and they were really afraid someone was going to hurt them. So when Neil Ensminger is actually a relative of mine, he came from the DPA office, and if you look up the street here, it may be kind of hard to tell, but you can see that there is another street. It's an alley that comes out right where that fire hydrant is. And the building on the right, across that fire hydrant on this side, that was the offices of the newspaper, the Daily Post-Athenian. He came down here, Mr. Ensminger, a highly respected man, came down here, went into this building to get an update on the vote count, and that's when those guys saw a diversion, and they just busted through the window. And then the deputy out here, Deputy Wendy Wise, who was just a real piece of work, he almost snapped and went crazy and started threatening to shoot people, and there's hundreds of people standing out here. And it's showed this picture right here. These guys come out, most of the people are across the street, but as you can see right there, they're holding their hands like they thought they were going to be shot. They just jumped out the window. So the tension's really increasing. And then Sheriff Mansfield pulls up, who was Paul Cantrell's chief deputy for a long time. He pulls up in his car, and they bring the ballot boxes out, and he takes his car right at this street, takes a left on College, and then another left on White Street to the jail, and puts the ballot boxes in there. And that's what really set off this battle, because these GIs were not going to let another election be stolen from them.
After he got out of the hospital, after being shot, he simply went home and healed and went forward to live his righteous life. So, I appreciate you all being here. Appreciate your presence and your participation and your interest. Because this was truly a seminal historical event for this community and for this country.
After an altercation took place at this cafe over here in which a GI was beat to within an inch of his life, he was on the ground and being kicked in the head, Mansfield shut down the elections and sent 2 deputies to the GI headquarters to capture those 2 poll watchers who had just escaped through the window.
We're here at the GI headquarters, which is now a First Horizon advisor's office. And this building is mostly unchanged. Of course, they have new windows and a new door, but this is where the GI Nonpartisan League had their campaign headquarters. They formed in spring 1946, a bipartisan group of the Democrats and Republicans, veterans who wanted to clean up their county. And Jim Buttram was our campaign manager, and Ralph Dugan, who was a veteran of the Navy, was with their attorney. And they met in here, and this is where they planned their campaign. They said your vote will be counted as cast, and we're going to get rid of the fee system where sheriffs are paid by salary only. We're going to make a lot of other reforms in this county.
And this building looks almost exactly like it did back in the day when it was the headquarters of the GI movement. Now, as this was unfolding and there was violence out in front of the Waterworks precinct, the sheriff sent down a couple of deputies. And they went inside of the GI movement headquarters and they took them hostage. And then when they didn't hear back from them, they sent a couple others and they went missing and sent a couple others. And before the sheriff even knew it, 7 deputies were being held inside of this building, which is when, of course, Bill White made his infamous, "maybe we'll just go and kill them" remark. Well, I think that he might have been scaring them, but I think the thought absolutely crossed his mind, because this was a man that just came back from the battles of Tarawa and Guadalcanal. But if you take a look throughout the city here, you can see it's a new courthouse, but it was built right over the top of the last one. And up here is where the violence had occurred earlier that day at the Waterworks precinct. Well, this is the GI headquarters, and Otto Kennedy, who is a representative of the Republican Party, is there. And he's a career politician, and he says, "I am out of here." However, he did give them fair use of his print shop and tire store, which I think was basically planned. He knew violence was going to happen, and the tire store was pretty well fortified and pretty far away from the jail, which was several streets away. And so they met there.
We are here at the site of the old armory. Of course, the current armory is out Highway 30 towards Etowah. And since the Battle of Athens, this has been a trucking company office and a furniture factory outlet storage area. Now it's not even being used, but at the time of the Battle of Athens, this was the McMinn County Armory. And right over here, this is McMinn Avenue. If you take a right, you'll be on Madison Avenue, and you're very close to downtown. So we're less than a mile from where the Battle of Athens occurred. But Mink Powers, who had a garage, he led a lot of GIs here, including Bill White on his truck. and they came in here, and this is where they got the guns. Now, there's some dispute, you know, did they break in? Did the guy who was working here let them in? Was he sympathetic with them? I don't know. There's an FBI report on this that was obtained from a Freedom of Information Act by Fighting Witch author Chris DeRose that tells about that. It was investigated. It was a break-in of a federal property, but they had to get guns from here because a lot of the guns have been rationed during World War II, and they used some of the guns from their home, but they didn't quite have enough to really pull off this assault on the jail, so they had to come here to the armory to get the guns. And they just went right back over to the side of the battle, less than a mile away, and continued firing on the jail until the deputies finally gave up.
And they went to the courthouse on Saturday morning where they talked about we need to keep everything quiet and we all just need to go home because both sides have done some things that you could be in trouble for, especially the stealing guns out of the armory. I should say borrowed. They didn't steal them because they brought them back. But at the same time, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, sent 2 agents down from the FBI to investigate the breaking in of the federal armory. He wasn't happy about this situation. And when they asked the people that were involved, that were in charge of the armory, they said, we don't know who they were, and if we did, they'd probably kill us. So nobody talked. And with that said, I was 50 years old before I ever found out anything about the Battle of the Bullets itself. I was working an extra job in Knoxville. I was a captain with the police department there, and we had a big symposium going on down at the convention center. And a man walked up to me and he said, Lockmiller, are you related to the Lockmillers of Athens? I said, my father's from there. And he said, what was his name? I said, James Lockmiller. He said, Jimmy Lockmiller, the Battle of the Bullets? And I said, the what? I'd never heard of it. I called my dad that night and I said, what about this Battle of the Bullets? He said, who you been talking to? He was not happy with the fact that people were talking about it because they weren't sure when the statute of limitations went around on stealing guns from the armory, you know. Luckily for me, nobody talked about it at that time when the FBI agents were down here, because had that happened and he'd got a couple of years in the penitentiary, I wouldn't be talking to him.
And after these initial acts of violence at the polling stations, the GIs began filtering their way from the Robert Lee Hotel to the headquarters to Otto Kennedy's tire shop because Otto Kennedy had been run out of town. And then at around 7:30, after raiding the armory at the advising of a few of their leaders, they began to gather on the hill overlooking the jail. Now all of these men were battle-trained and battle-hardened, and they knew they needed the high ground, which is something that the hill very conveniently provided, and the post office behind it, this building here, gave them very good cover. They knew that they could exchange fire all night. And so they began at around 9 p.m. Apparently, it's up to legend, but Bill White is said to have charged his rifle, and at 9 p.m., the deputies were standing over here, and the GIs were over there. Darkness had fallen, and they heard the sound of a charging rifle, so they ran inside. And they said, you have, so many minutes to turn over the ballots, and the deputies said, come and take them. So the firing began. And the initial firing, you'll find it interesting, took place right across the road from the cafe where one of those incidents of violence took place, which actually caused the polling stations to close.
These are the bullet holes, some of the what little physical evidence is left of the Battle of Athens. The bullet holes right here on this building, which was the Dixie Cafe. And the jail was just right over here. I mean, right there to the left of this building in the parking lot. But in the Dixie Cafe over here, a GI poll watcher named Bob Harrell objected to the Cantrell deputies letting a 15-year-old girl vote. And of course, at the time, the voting age was 21, not to mention, not even 18. And he objected to that, so one of the deputies got out their club and it was called blackjacking. Blackjacked the man, and he was given a concussion and taken to the hospital, which at the time, clinic, which at the time was just up this alley to the left, right off camera here. And thankfully he did survive.
So the reason so many of the bullet holes are right above this area, kind of a little bit ways down from the jail, is because the GIs were trying to take out the street lights so that they could work under cover of darkness. And the battle did last pretty much all night. And it's interesting that these aren't really marked all that well. According to legend, Bill White shot out a couple of the gas lights there so that men could move their way up the sides of the jail. Of course, because they were men of war, they did leave the back open. And this arrow here represents the medical clinic. If you were injured, they would let you leave out the back.
Right over here, you'll see a drive-through of Capstar Bank, formerly Athens Federal. Where that drive-through used to be the site of Dr. Forey's clinic. It was not a hospital per se, but it was still a medical facility where a lot of the people who suffered injuries during the Battle of Athens were taken, and that was torn down maybe 20, 30 years ago. But it was very close to the jail, which is just right over here. If we go this way, right in there is where the jail was, where that orange traffic cone is. Yeah, so that's how close the clinic was to the jail where these guys were getting hurt. And the GIs were sending people over to the clinic, and even the deputies would come out the back because the GIs did not guard the back. They wanted to get them an escape patch, and a lot of the injured deputies would just come out of the back of the jail and go right to the clinic. And Dr. Forey's treating people on both sides of this battle all night long. Thankfully, no one died. We're here at Cedar Grove Cemetery in Athens, the oldest cemetery in the city. It's owned by the city, the most prestigious cemetery in this city. And here lies Knox L. Henry. He was elected sheriff on the day of the Battle of Athens for the GI ticket. He was a Republican. Of course, the other three candidates were Democrats, and there was another Republican at the bottom of the ticket. Unfortunately, Knox Henry passed away of liver cirrhosis at age 39, but he served 2 terms as sheriff of this county. Had a great reputation, and was a stand-up sheriff, and served our country in World War II, including in the North African campaign.
It seems like he might have had some stress left over from the war.
Yeah, he probably had some undiagnosed PTSD that affected his alcohol intake, unfortunately.
One thing nobody would ever say about Paul Cantrell is that he was an outsider to this county. In reality, his father was born here. His grandfather was born here in 1828, before Cherokee removal. So he had firm ties to eastern Tennessee, and he even had family members that fought in the Revolutionary War. So he was no outsider, and he was just as well tied to this county as the GIs were. And here we are at 812 Ohio Avenue in the town of Etowah, and this actually served as Sheriff Paul Cantrell's house. And what's interesting to take note of here is that he literally oversaw one of the voting precincts, which was in this building right over here.
We are here at Mars Hill Presbyterian Church on North Jackson Street in downtown Athens. The soldiers are firing on the jail on the other side of this office building, and the jail is just 1 block away, so it shows you how close this church was. This is the oldest church in Athens, and I am a member. It's celebrating its 200th anniversary this year. I'm going to read you a letter from one of our former members, Reverend Love, who was Reverend of this church during World War II. Now, you know how it is with churches and ministers and politics. They don't like to get involved in that kind of thing. They like to be impartial, but things were so bad with the election here, our minister decided to write our congressman in Knoxville, Congressman John J. Jennings, about election fraud. Attorney General Francis C. Biddle, Washington, D.C., of course he copied the congressman on the letter. Dear Sir, during the past few years, and increasingly so, the people of McMinn County have been subjected to a ruthless exploitation at the hands of unscrupulous politicians who sacrifice public liberties for the sake of private gain. In recent elections, nothing has been considered. Lo, it will enable them to perpetuate themselves in office. The election during the month of August, this is 1942, was held under the supervision of armed men, some of whom were brought in from adjoining counties and states. These men were in and around the voting places in direct violation of the state election laws, and by intimidation, both obvious and otherwise, so controlled the election as to leave no element of uncertainty as to its outcome. Decent citizens feared to bring their wives to the polls and often felt it unwise to cast their own ballots. It was not needless fear, but wise precaution that was taken by such an attitude. The manner in which the present political ring, and I do not say party, for both Republicans and Democrats are participants, has controlled the elections is more reminiscent of tales concerning the Gestapo in Nazi Germany than of proper procedures in free America. If there is any means by which the civil liberties of the people might be protected and such outrages prevented, it would be a worthy work in the interest of all that freedom-loving Americans hold dear. It is not possible for a letter to contain information concerning all subversive and unscrupulous activities that have taken place in this county, but I have no doubt that thorough investigation would bring it to light such an evidence that would enable the situation to be remedied and the rights of the people preserved. Sincerely, H.L. Love, Minister, Marsville Presbyterian Church, Athens, Tennessee. I will add one thing. I believe in an attempt to remain impartial, Reverend Love did mention Republicans involved, but in this particular instance, this machine was controlled by the Democratic Party in McMinn County, and there might have been some former Republicans that kind of joined in with their ranks, but again, he tried to look impartial, but it was the machine led by Paul Cantrell and Pat Mansfield and George Woods, and that whole ring, as he said, they were the ones really in charge, and it got so bad that he felt like he had to speak out, even though he's a minister, to make sure there were fair elections in his county. We're here at the site of the former McMinn County Jail. This parking lot right here for this business Carter Insurance, this is where the jail sat. It was pretty deep. It was 3 stories high because back then the sheriff had the option of living on the 3rd floor with his family. And there's now a mural that was erected by some citizens of this community who felt like this event needed to be commemorated. And this only features one person on the mural, and that's Tom Gillespie, the black farmer who was almost killed that day, along with a lot of other nameless citizens carrying ballot boxes, and a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that was ran in her column a week after the battle to show you how much national significance it had. And this historical marker over here has a picture of the jail as it looked when it was still stood here. It was torn down around 1955, about 10 years after the battle. And this mural, very good mural, was done by Sam Welty, who does a lot of these kind of murals. He does really great work. This is put up in 2018. Otto Kennedy was the chief deputy for Knox Henry, who was sheriff from 1946 to 1950. Then Knox Henry stepped down and Otto Kennedy became sheriff. Otto Kennedy was the sheriff when this jail was built in the mid-1950s. It replaced the jail during the Battle of Athens that has sadly since been torn down. And this operated as a jail for the county until about 30-ish years ago. And now it's just sitting here dilapidating as county property. Nothing new about that in this country. It's property just dilapidating when it has a lot of history in it. We are here on Ingleside Avenue, right across the street from the Hiwassee Mental Health Center, just so you have a frame of reference. This was once the halfway court. It was a honky-tonk, and it was called that because it was halfway between Knoxville and Chattanooga. We are currently in the Athens city limits, but at the time this was about a mile or so away from downtown, which is that direction. And some of the structure of the halfway court honky-tonk is still here. We're here because Earl Ford, a CB from Meigs County, which is McMinn County's neighbor to the west, was here in 1944 on leave. When the war's still going on, he comes here to have a good time. Probably wasn't even drunk, but a deputy deputized another man named George Sperling, who was just a real punk, deputized him on the spot because Earl Ford was resisting arrest, but I knew he had some money being in the military, saying, you're drunk, and then he has on his sailor uniform. There's no pockets in this uniform. So they fight him because he's resisting arrest, and then Sperling had just been, deputized by another deputy. I can't remember if it was Menace Wilburn or Wendy Wise. I think it was Menace Wilburn. Just shoots Earl Ford. And he falls right here in the parking lot, and they plant a knife under his body, but everyone knew he didn't have a knife because there were no pockets on the Navy uniform. He was only 22 years old. And then Sperling was indicted for murder, but because of the connections that the Cantor machine had with the justice system around here, the district attorney and the judges and other attorneys, they were able to get the trial continued. Not unheard of to have a trial continued and postponed, but to be postponed as much as this one was, it was postponed for 3 years. And there were thankfully enough witnesses who told the newspaper and testified in court that Earl Ford did not have a knife and was not drunk and was straight up murdered. In 1947, George Sperling was convicted of 15 years in prison. But this is one of the places where a deputy was killed by a Cantrell deputy. And further increasing tensions and leading to a bipartisan ticket of Democrats and Republican veterans to throw out this machine and clean up their county.